Hi, in this video I'll talk about how we can deploy multi-container application to Azure Web App via Azure Container Registry. Before going into details, I am just hoping you have some of the basic understanding how Docker works, how Azure Web App works, how Azure Container Registry works. So these are the prerequisites for this video, but it's not mandatory. I'll try to cover as much as possible, but considering I want to make a shorter video, I may not able to go into details. So it's better if you have basic understanding of these things. I'll try to share the links also so that you can go through that and have the basic understandings. Okay, so let's just jump directly into code and see how it works. Now, before going into the Visual Studio, one thing which you need to have is Docker installed in your local desktop, and there are set of available videos or tutorials which you can go through how to download and how to install that. Just follow those steps. You can easily install the Docker into your machine. This is mandatory because if you want to run your application in your local, Docker is needed. So I have installed in my machine here, and this is the official site where you can go and easily download for the Docker desktop, and it will start the downloading and you can easily run it. It will install, and if there is an issue, they will tell you the steps which you need to follow in case you are having any issues. Cool. So let us jump directly into Visual Studio. Now the step one is to open the Visual Studio and then click on create a new project. In this I'll first go and select that Web API template and then click next. And first I need to give the name, so I'll say Docker app in Azure. Click next, and here I'll select the framework 6.0. Authentication, I don't want it. I'm okay with HTTPS. Yes. Enable Docker, I want it. And operating system, I want Linux. Use controller, yes. Enable OpenAPI support, yes. This is for Swagger. Click on create, and it will take a moment to create the project. Now if you see here, if you click on the output, here it will tell you it is going to restore all the packages, and it will also go and check what are the prerequisites needed for this container. So basically what it does, when we create a project, by enabling the Docker options, it will create the project as in container, and we will see the same into the Docker desktop. So it says container started successfully, and if I go to the Docker desktop, here we can see Docker app in Azure is there, and that's the image name. So if I click on this, I can go and check various things under the logs. I can inspect, I can click on the terminal, then files and stats. So these are the set of things which I can do in the Docker Azure. And if I click on a container, this is the image which it has created. So basically whenever we create a project, first we need to create an image, and that image we need to deploy into the Azure Container Registry. So if I click on images, we can also see from here there should be Docker app in Azure. So this is the image name which it has created. Now I'm back in Visual Studio. First what I will do, I'll click on this Docker and to run this project and see how it works. It has initialized this project, and if you see it has opened this Swagger window, and where we can go and just execute it and see the output. So basically this is the response which we are getting when we are executing the API. And if you want, you can also go back to the Visual Studio and click on the under this containers, click on the ports, and there you can select which port you want to open. If you click here, it will open that, but since this is an API project, we need to call the container also. So I will say weather forecast. So it has given me the JSON output, which is the expected one. Cool. So API is running fine. Now I'm back into Visual Studio. I will go through the Docker file which this project has created at the time of creation of this project, and you can create at the time of creation also, or right click on your project, click on add. There is an option to add the Docker support. Basically it will just create your application. It will initialize a container for your application and create an image for that. And since we have selected the option at the project creation time, we need not to add it. But if you have not done that, you can add after project creation also. Now let me go back to the file and this is a set of the, I'll say, commands which it has added, and I'll go through one by one. So the first one, it says it's a base image for the Docker, and it's tell basically this project will use ASP.NET 6.0, so that is first is required. Next is it sets the working directory for the Docker image, so /app is the one, and the other next two line, expose 80, expose 443, these are the ports which it will open for the container. So the next line, basically it sets the base image for the Docker file to this, and which is the official one for the Microsoft right now. And the next line is basically it tells build process which folder it needs to use, and it basically copies the existing one. So existing one right now it is present here into the build location which it will create at the runtime. Then it restore the project. Basically here it will go and restore the NuGet packages which all are needed for this. Next is copy dot dot. Basically this is very important. It tells whatever the things you want to copy from source to destination, this is the destination where it will go and store all the files, and it works. Next it sets this line as the working directory, it builds the project, and finally it publish the projects, and this line publish the projects, and it publish into this location which it has created under the directory. And this is the final one where it says okay, whenever you're running the application, the entry point should be this DLL. Because it's a .NET Core application, everything will be converted and become a DLL. So far we are good. We have just created the API, we have executed it, and it is working fine. So next what I will do, I will add the MVC project, and to do that I'll click on the solution, click on add new project, and I'll select that MVC one, click next, and I will give it a name as MVC UI, and click next. Again I'll just use the 6.0 authentication none, yes, enable Docker, yes, and I'll unselect this and I'll show you how we can create this Docker once the project is created. Click on create. So MVC project is created, and if I want I can just execute it. For that I need to make this project as a startup and then run it. So it has initialized and it is running fine. Cool. So we are good here. Now next we will go and add the Docker support in that MVC. So let me click on this, right click, click on add, click on Docker support, target OS Linux, yes, click on OK. Now as I shown you earlier, for the Web API one we have the Docker file. The same way, when we created the project we can add the Docker file also, and for this MVC one it has added this Docker file, and the same set of commands it has added for MVC one. The only difference is the name of the project, you can see, otherwise everything remains same. And if I want to run now, and now I need to click on Docker, and if you want there are other options also available, but I'll just click on the Docker. It will build the project and it will run the images. So if you see here, so it has executed the MVC one. Now to run the other one, let me go back, click on containers, click on post pods. Okay, so this is giving an issue because we need to go and select weather forecast here. Okay, so it's not working, I know why. Currently we need to make both the project as in the startup and multiple startup projects, section start apply. Okay, now run, both will work. And if I go back, here's a Swagger one also, and if I go back in the code, click on containers, now click on port. Now if I go and type weather forecast here, it has stopped in the breakpoint which I have added, and this is output. Cool, so it's working fine. Now next I'm back into Visual Studio. What I will do next, I will add the Docker Compose, basically the container orchestration. To do that you need to select the project and then click on container orchestration, and under that it will show what are the different systems you have. Since we have just Docker, it will give us that option. Click on OK. Target operating system Linux is OK. Click OK. It will add a separate project, and in that couple of files will be added. And if you select Docker ignore, it will tell the basic sets, the how the git ignore or VS Code works. And then is the Docker Compose file. It will tell what are the services your project have. Currently, I have added the Docker Compose for API project. In this, only one services is coming with the name of that API project. And if you see, these are the it's a YAML file which has the information, the image name which it will create when we run this, and what is the context, what is the build context which we will be using, and it also tells where the Docker file is present. So Docker file for that API project is present in this project at this location, and that's what is mentioned over here. Now, step 2, what I will do, I will add the Docker Compose for this UI project. Right click on that, click to add, go to container orchestration, select OK, yes, OK. Now, if you see here, it has added the orchestration, it has added the service with the name MVC UI, and it is under the services, and it says this is the name which I will be using when you run this, and under that it tells the context, the default context which we are using, and then is the location where this Docker file is present. So under the MVC UI project, Docker file is present. So this is what it will does. Now click save. Now to run this project, I will click on the Docker Compose here, and it will build and run this projects. So let us see how it works. Now it has opened the Swagger UI, and let me go back, click on containers. These are the two which are running. So I want to run that MVC one, click on that. It should give me the MVC page. Cool. So this is how we can use Docker Compose to run both the projects at the same time. Okay, I'll go back to the project. And another thing, under the Docker Compose, there's another file which was created. It's a Docker Compose override file. So basically, by default, if you want some of the settings which should be applied to the both, you can just add it here. And under this file, you will see these are the environment variables which it has setting, and then these are the ports which is it going to expose for the container. And then there's something called as a volumes. So volume, I will say, whenever we are running any container, we build that or we destroy it multiple times, and sometimes we want some of the information should be retained, and those informations will go to the volumes. I'm not going into detail in the volume in this particular video. Hopefully I'll create another one for on this little later. So I'll just remove the volumes here from here, and ports I also don't want it. Let me just remove this also from these two locations. And I don't want ASP.NET Core URLs here. If required, I will just add in the Docker files or compose file itself. I just keep this one variable in this particular location. Now the next thing which I want to do here is I will use that MVCU project to hit that API and then get some data from there and through that Docker container. So to do that, first what I need to do, I will go to the Docker Compose one, and under that, for the time being, I will just remove this image. It's not needed when we are running it in the local. So step 1, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a default network so that these two containers which it will be created can communicate to each other. To do that, first thing what I need to do here is I need to add a network here. So network will go under the build networks, and I will say the name learn network. Okay, and the same thing will go under the build here, and it will also have the name learn network. I'll just copy paste instead of going wrong. And one last thing is, so that it should get created, we should have networks at this particular location, and where I will be mentioning what is the name of the network I have, learn network, and what is the default driver I'll be using, bridge. So basically What this step will do, it will create a bridge network. So what is the bridge network? And let me bring the Docker official website here, and it says it's a default network driver. If you don't specify driver, this is the type of network you are creating. And bridge network are usually used when your application run in standalone containers that need to communicate. Since in our case we have our two containers, the API one and the UI one, we want both should be communicate. We first build the network and then we will add this application under those network, and then they both can communicate to each other. For that purpose, I've added a bridge network and given it a name learn network, and that is what I have just associated it with the both the services. So just remove the unnecessary spacing and click save. I'll just try to run it to see if everything works fine, if there is no issue, and I can see no. Okay, so there was extra space. I just removed it. Run your application again and let's see. Okay, I know that the issue here is, and let me click on containers. No such ports. Cool. But this application is working fine. The issue is we have not added any ports here, and in the Docker Compose files you should have the ports, and if the Docker Compose does not have, it will go and look into the override file. We have removed the ports from the override file also. So let me go back and add the ports in this file. So to add the ports, what I need to do here is click on write ports, and I will just say I want this host should go into 881 and container should be into this one, and the same MVC one I need it under the port 8080, and container should open into 80. And now let me just save it and run this. Let's see. And I think you know what is the issue here. Now run it. Okay, so it's the API project is working under the 8081. Cool. This is what we have mentioned here. And let me click on containers, click here, click on the other one. That MVC one is also running. Cool. So we are good here. Now back into Visual Studio. Let me stop the project. And next important thing which I will go and do here is I will just open this weather forecast controller, and I will just copy and I will just comment this. Under that I will create another one, and in this I will just return Rohit. So I'm just modifying my controller, and since it's a string, it's cool. This should work. Now the next thing which I'm going to do here is I will go to the UI controller, and under that I will add little bit of code. So the code is string API URL. I'll just add it here, and I will use the HTTP client, and for that I will just use client.base address, yes, and then I'll check the response message. Yes, and I will say we have weather forecast. Okay, and then if response dot is succeeded, yes, what it should do, I will just try to read it. Yes, and then what I'll do, very important, this is the MVC thing, view back dot message is equal to response. Okay, and if there is error, view back dot message, it should be error in project. And another thing which I will be doing here is it should be part of task because it is an asynchronous. And one another thing, I will just add that try catch to see if there is any exception. Okay, I'll just put a debugger here. Okay, so this looks good. But one another thing is I need to add URL, and for that I will go here and I'll say API URL, and it should be http:// and the service name which I have used it. So this is the URL. Cool. Let me save this, and it should be URL. Copy and go back to your controller. Under that, add a configuration thing. Configuration. Okay. Configuration. Having configuration here. Okay, this looks good. Now this will be underscore configuration, and where I will paste it. Okay, cool. So what I'm doing here is I'm just reading the URL which I defined into the host file, the app setting files, and I'm just creating the HTTP thing to call the API, and it will hit that API controller, get the code and see if it is success, read what I'm passing from there, and if not, there is an error. So I just missed to add a semicolon here. I'll add it. Cool. Okay, one another thing which I need to do here is, let me go to the views and click here. Under that, just add a p tag and write here view bag dot message, so which we are reading. Cool, everything looks good, and let me run this and see if it works or not. Swagger is fine. Containers, click on that MVC one, and no, let me go back, and the error is this code should go in this particular location, but I have added into privacy. And to fix that, what I'll do, I'll go there and click on privacy, and to see at least if it is returning what we need here. Response, yes, it is a success. Let me read the body, and the body should be Rohit. Cool, so this is good. Let me stop it here, and let me just copy this thing from this location to this, and these things also. Let me copy and paste it here. Now I will run it. It should work now. Click on containers, click the port. Cool. This is how two API, two multi-container can communicate to each other over a network. Cool, we are good here. Now next what I will do, I will go to the Azure portal and create a container registry and the web app and deploy this one and deploy the images over there. I'm into portal.azure.com. First I will create the Azure Container Registry. For that I'll just type Container Registries here. And this is the option I need to say Container Registries. Then click on Create. And then I'll create a resource group here. I'll say RSGP ACR. Click OK. You need to give the registry some name. So I'll say Docker app in Azure. And location I'll select is US2. SKU standard is okay. Networking by default. Everything default. Click on validate. Click on create. So it is going to create the container registry. We just wait for a moment. The resource is created. Let me click on go to resource, and it has created the Azure Container Registry. I just need to enable one thing. I need to enable the admin user. This is needed whenever Azure Web App tries to read the images from the container registry. So I'm good here. Now next, I'll go to the Visual Studio and I'll stop this solution here. I'll right click on the solution, click on the open folder in Explorer. There I'll just type cmd to open the command prompt, and under this what I need to do, first I need to connect to Azure. So I'll type Azure login here, connect to the Azure via Azure login if you have Azure CLI installed. If not, just Google it, the steps to install the Azure CLI into your local. So I'll click on AZ login and it will just open a browser window. Okay, so I've logged in successfully. The next step what I need to do here is I need to connect my application to the container registry. For that I have a command here which says AZ ACR login and hyphen name, and the name is, if I go back to the Azure and click on overview, this is the name of the server, and paste it here. Okay, I got a response. I got an error. I'm just trying to reconnect that. So let's see. Okay, login succeeded. I don't know why it failed earlier, but we are good here. Okay, so next what I will do, I will build this project using the Docker Compose, and the command is Docker Compose build. So it will build both of the projects. Okay, so I got a one error. Basically, it failed to restore the packages here. I'm getting this connection error. So there is a workaround, and hopefully you might not need it. If in case you have succeeded, just skip couple of seconds. Otherwise, if you are also facing this issue due to the NuGet packages, I'll tell you one workaround, and the workaround is go back to your project, open your compose file, and under that, not in the compose file, go to your Docker file, and I'm just going to modify this. And what I'll do, I'll just comment it here, and I will add these two lines. Basically, I'll just copy my local packages into the root location, and then I will go and do the restore. And the same I need to do here in the Docker one. And for the API projects, just comment it, add these two lines here, and in this case it should be this project. And another thing which I need to do now, pay your attention here. I will just go to the root location. So basically this is the root location where I have my NuGet packages in my local machine. Just copy it, go back to your solution, paste it there. While it is copying from your root to your local, you need to do another thing. You need to go and create a NuGet file, and I will just go to the notepad here. I have a one here. I'll just copy and paste it, and I'll just need to save this file, and it should be in the location, I'll tell you, this location, and the file name should be nuget.config. Click save. It will just save that file. Now come back and let me see if it has completed this. Still running, so we'll wait for another few seconds. Done. Now let us go back and let me rerun it. Okay, So this is done, build is completed. Now we can go and check by typing docker ps, and it will give us the name of these two containers. And we can also check with the docker images ls images we can see here, and in our case R is the one. Okay, so I have many with the same name. It look like these are the ones, these are the images we have. Now we are at a position where we can push these images to the Azure Container Registry, but these will not work. We need to do couple of changes in the compose files, and then we can build and deploy these images to the container registry. To do that, first I'll back into the project and I'll go to the compose file, and there the first thing which I want to do here is I need to add the name. So to add the name, click on Docker API services and then type the image, and then you need to give the name. So I'll say the name is this thing, and another same I need to do here is under that MVC UI project also service, and here also I'll just type it this thing. Now another thing which I need to do here is need to go to the Azure, and under that I need to select the server name that I need to paste it here. At both the locations. So the image name will consist of the location where you want to send that, and then the name of the service. So that is how you should always comprise the name of the image. One thing is done. The next thing I need to add, in that Azure, remember in that Azure Web App, there is only one port for HTTP request. You can expose any of the port, but only one port will work for the HTTP request. We cannot see both this API running, both the services running in the Azure. So what I need to do, I will remove this port. I'll just keep the one from that MVC one. So the communication will happen from that MVC to that API. This is the second thing which we have done. Now another thing, I need to add the environment variables in both the locations. I have it copied here, so I'll just go and paste it. And the same way it goes for the API one. Save it. Now we have done all the changes which are required. We have to rebuild this, and then we will deploy these images into the Azure. And let me go back. I'll type docker compose build here. Spelling is compose build. It will build the images. Now to see the images, you need to click docker image ls, and the one which we have created here is these are the ones. This is the one. So one is this one. Now to push this, first I will just clear this window, and to push these images, what I need to do here is I need to write docker push that image name. You can see that image from this project. Just copy this, paste it here, add the tag and the latest one. So it will push that API image to the Azure Container Registry. Cool. So it has pushed the API one. Now we'll try to push the next. And again, I'll go back to the code. I'll just copy this URL, paste it here, type latest, and it will push that MVC project into the Azure Container Registry. Cool. So both are pushed. Now let me go back to the Azure. So I'm back into Azure, click on repositories. Cool. So I can see both that here. One is that MVC one, another is the API one. Cool. So we are good here. I'm back into Azure. I'll click on the app services to create the Azure web app. I'll click on create. I'll select the resource group here. Then I'll name it as Docker app in Azure web app. Click on Docker container. Operating system, by default it will select Linux. We are good with that. Click on East US 2. Good with that. Click on Docker. Then click on options. Click on Docker Compose. And there it will select the container registry we have. We only just have one. Then now you need to give the configuration. It's an optional. You can give it once this web app is created. But since we have the file here, Docker app in Azure, and under that I'll select the compose file, and everything looks good. Click on networking, monitoring, default options. Click on review plus create. Click on create. It will take a moment to deploy Azure web app. Now click on resource, go to resource. Under that, click on browse, and if everything is fine, it should run the application. Superb, cool. Now this is working fine, and it is communicating with an API, and it is bringing this Rohit from there. Bingo, we are good here. Cool. So there are a couple of steps I want you should remember. First, do not try to open multiple ports for that HTTP in that Azure Compose file, in the Docker Compose file. This issue I was doing. I struggled it for a couple of days to fix this. Then I realized, okay, there's only one port and I'm just trying to opening both the ports and it is not working. You need to remove the volume from that override file if you're not using it. That's another issue which you will face. In case there's another issue, open the logs, try to have some logs and then see where you went wrong. And just try to deploy one container and then see if it is working fine, and then in your local try it to make both the container communicate with each other, then see if it is working fine, then deploy it to the Azure. You need to follow step-by-step approach when you want to deploy it, only then it will work. It took me a couple of days to figure out all the issues which I am getting to fix it. Cool. If you like this video, just subscribe to my channel and share it with your friends.